Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the area around mile marker 68 along the Denali Highway and the hunting territory around the Alpine Creek Lodge in Alaska. The highway was constructed to connect the town of Paxson and Cantwell and runs through well-preserved tundra and primitive territory. Denali National Park is about 60 miles to the west as the crow flies, and other than that, there isn't much of anything but wilderness around. The Nelchina Public Use Area is about 25 miles to the southeast of our location in the Clearwater Mountains in the Hayes Range. The climate here is classified as a subarctic climate, which means the winters are long, cold, and snowy, and summers are mild. According to UCLA's research, boreal forests and tundra dominate alongside an abundance of berry bushes. The usual Alaska cast of animals are found here, including moose and caribou, with the occasional Dall sheep hiding amongst the crags. Predators include wolves, lynx, black bears, and brown bears. On April 15, 2016, father and son Brett and Glenn Bond were ripping along on their snowmobiles up a hill in hopes of catching a giant brown bear as it emerged from its winter den. Brett was a 35-year-old hunting guide and resided in Wasilla, a few hours to the south. Glenn was an active 77-year-old retiree from education and guiding and enjoyed anything outdoors, especially with his son. Spring bear hunting tends to be controversial to people who don't understand bear management. It can be viewed as unfair to the bears, given they are just waking from hibernation and may not be aware of what awaits them outside the confines of their dens. It is certainly not without its dangers, as surprising a hungry brown bear isn't the safest of pursuits. The men had decided to take snowmobiles to aid in getting back to bear denning locations. The basic strategy was to glass snowbanks for tracks or den openings and wait for the bears inside to emerge. The weather was cooperating for the most part as the skies were clear and temperatures were manageable. Brett knew that his father wouldn't be able to go on many more hunting trips, and memories of prior hunting trips flashed through his mind as the men buzzed up the slopes. Brett took his first caribou when he was only 7 years old with his dad right beside him the entire trip. This hunting trip would mean much more to both of the men than what they expected. The Bonds were both very experienced woodsmen and trained in wilderness and emergency medicine. Brett had completed a medical program called Learn to Return, which relayed wilderness medical strategies. They'd had a handful of tangles with various bears throughout the decades, but had always managed to avoid an attack somehow. It wasn't long before Brett spotted an opening in the snow about 24 miles into their ride. He could see bear tracks around the opening, but none leading away from it. This typically means the bear's awake from its slumber, but isn't quite adjusted to the bright and stimulating surroundings outside of its den enough to venture out permanently. Parking their machines a short distance away, the men slowly approached the den opening and observed the evidence around it to confirm their suspicions. After several minutes of analysis, Brett announced he had followed each of the bear's paths around the opening, and it hadn't left the snowbank, opting to return to its den. Now the men knew they would need to find a place that gave them a good view of the area surrounding the den opening. They sneaked up to within 36 yards of the den entrance and set Glenn up with his gun, loaded and ready. Brett decided to sneak around to a vantage point above the den to view the tracks the bear had left. He managed to get within 10 yards of the opening and started looking at the tracks the bear had left before returning to the den for more rest. Brett's observations were interrupted by his father yelling, "He's coming out, Brett!" At first Glenn was concerned that the bear may be headed toward his son. He fired a round from his rifle, hoping to drop the bear before it could pose a threat to his son. Upon hearing Glenn's cries to Brett, the bear made it certain just which one of the men had drawn its full attention. As the bear approached him, Glenn managed to get to his knees from his prone shooting position. Brett watched as the enormous bear covered ground toward his father so quickly that its speed seemed surreal. In a matter of only a few seconds, the bear closed the 120 feet between Glenn and itself and slammed him to the ground in freight train fashion. Brett saw the bear grab his crumpled father by the back portion of his neck and didn't miss a step in dragging him down the slope. His father's form took on a mannequin-esque quality as it limply bounced and jerked across the snow. As soon as Brett saw his father being dragged away from him, he began to sprint toward them. With his .375 hunting rifle in one hand and his .454 Casol pistol in the other, he was hoping he had brought enough firepower to bring the bear down before it killed one or both of the men. Brett could hear his father screaming in terror and pain as he approached. He used those cries to help him hone in on their location. As Brett got within range of his father and the bear, he raised his pistol straight out in front of him. He could see the bear shaking its head as it bit onto his father's face and let out a yell to draw its attention. As soon as it saw Brett running toward it, the bear began to run toward him as well. It was clear the bear had accepted Brett's challenge to mutual combat and intended to maim or kill him. As Glenn lay in a blurred smear of red in the background, the battle scene now focused on Brett and the bear as they converged on each other. Brett focused on the form of the bear as it bounded toward him, growing in scale with each leap. Brett squeezed the trigger on his pistol, and the 360-grain buffalo bore slug slammed into the bear's neck. The impact of the pistol round caused the bear to pull up. Its hesitance allowed Brett to circle around it and position himself between the bear and his father. He took careful aim and squeezed the trigger once more and struck the bear square in the chest. Now having the bear isolated, and the concern of striking his father with a bullet out of his mind, Brett knew the distance between the two men and the bear was dangerously close. He knew his next shot had to bring an end to the attack. He focused his pistol sights on the bear's head and hoped its report would deliver the collapsed bear. But it didn't drop the bear, even though his shot hit right where he'd aimed. Instead of crumpling, the massive bear stood to its hind legs and towered over Brett. Taking careful aim again, Brett squeezed the pistol's trigger and struck the bear in the neck once more, causing it to tumble backward and down the slope. As it rolled, Brett continued to fire until his pistol was empty. Brett watched the bear tumble down the mountainside. It didn't show any signs of life once it stopped rolling a few hundred yards away. Then his mind turned back to his father. Glenn lay lifeless and still, surrounded by a growing pool of blood. Brett knew his father's condition was life-threatening, if his wounds hadn't already claimed his life. He approached his dad and hoped to hear an utterance of some kind come from his lips as his dying words. After a few minutes, Glenn sat up and began talking to his son in a relatively normal fashion. His face was horrific and mutilated by the jaws of the bear in only a few seconds, but he seemed to have all of his faculties about him. The pictures of the dead bear with its bullet wounds, as well as Glenn's tattered face, would not pass muster with YouTube guidelines, so I have posted them on my Patreon account below. I must warn you before you view them that they are the worst pictures of any bear attack victim I've ever seen, and if you're the kind of person that is bothered by images like this, do not look at them. They're very difficult to get out of your mind. Brett wanted to assess his father's injuries, as he was trained to do in his wilderness first aid classes. Aside from the bloody and distorted mess from which he could hear his father's words coming from, Glenn didn't seem to have any other major injuries. Brett was very worried, though, at the amount of blood his father had lost. He used a handkerchief to push his father's face back together as best he could and fastened it around Glenn's head to hold it all tight. As soon as he had tied the knot on the handkerchief, he could hear his father choking on his own blood and flesh as it was forced toward his windpipe. Brett realized he would have to leave his father's wounds open as they retreated down the mountain in search of medical attention. That is when Glenn started directing his son to aid in his own rescue. Part of his directions were instructing Brett to take photos of his injuries, as well as the dead bear. Brett brought the snowmobile around and helped his father onto the rear portion of the seat. Brett fought the urge to haphazardly race across the snow, knowing that each jostle and bump inflicted pain and discomfort to his dad. They made the 24-mile return trip and reached the Denali Highway in about 90 minutes. They had arrived at the Alpine Creek Lodge from which they were hunting, and called Alaska State Troopers to rally medical help from there. A medical helicopter piloted by Brett Westcott from Life Med Alaska Helicopter Service picked Glenn up at the lodge and flew him to the hospital. During the flight to the hospital, Glenn was recorded instructing flight crew members to keep a cool head and not panic. His voice was notably clear in the recordings I listened to. He noted that his appearance must be pretty bad, judging by the reaction of the crew. As the helicopter flew toward Anchorage, Glenn objected and ordered them to the hospital at Matanuska. They agreed and redirected their flight path accordingly. Incredibly, Glenn's face was repaired in a single surgery, and he was released from the hospital only 9 days after his admittance. He reportedly received no blood transfusions to replace the tremendous amount of blood he'd lost as a result of the bear attack. In an additional indicator of Glenn's toughness, he reportedly received no anesthetic or pain medications during the operation to reconstruct his face. He later had his hearing and vision repaired by surgeons in Idaho. The surgeons there indicated that Glenn refused pain pills and never returned for the follow-up visits after his operations. Incredibly, Glenn made a rapid recovery from the attack, though he lost an eye, due to a significant portion of that side of his face being crushed by the bear's jaws. His injured wrist was also casted until it healed. In an investigation of the attack afterward, authorities measured Brett's strides as he attempted to catch up to his father as the bear dragged him off. They indicated that his strides were the same length as Olympic sprinters, indicating his effort was above and beyond what he could have otherwise performed. They also measured the distance between the bear's claw marks in the snow and Brett's boot tracks when he fired the fatal shots toppling the bear. Those shots were fired at a distance of only 5.5 feet in separation between Brett and the bear. Brett relayed a lot of information about what led him to fit himself out with the pistol he chose. After comparing reports and thoughts on the topic, it's clear that pistols of at least .40 caliber demonstrated the highest degree of effectiveness in killing an attacking bear. The most important factor in the stopping power of the pistol pertains to the bullets it sends down range. Loading it with hardened rounds is key, and there is research indicating that a semi-automatic pistol allows a person to send lead a full second faster in reaction time than a revolver, and holds more bullets in its magazine than most revolvers do in their cylinders. Additional research listed a firearm as 97% effective in stopping a bear attack, and bear spray being 90 to 93% effective on brown bears. As a side note, bear spray is reportedly 100% successful in stopping a polar bear attack. One noted difference is that bears who are sprayed have a high rate of returning in a follow-up attack after being sprayed initially. The use of a firearm tended to eliminate that potential. Additional numbers indicate that a person properly dispensing bear spray had a 0% rate of death during the altercation, with only 2% receiving minor injuries. By contrast, a person utilizing a firearm in their own defense fared worse, with only a 76% success rate due to the requirement of fatally striking a charging bear as it covers uneven or sloped ground. All research indicates that carrying bear spray and a powerful firearm increase a bear attack survivor's odds of avoiding injury or death. As for the carcass of the bear that attacked Glenn, Brett went back to the attack site the following Saturday and reclaimed it in compliance with Alaska state game laws. The bear's pelt measured 9 foot square, which means from paw to paw and nose to the tip of his tail was at least 9 feet in each direction. That is a very large brown bear. Brett returned to guiding bear hunts very soon after his father's attack occurred. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you feel comfortable enough in your shooting skills to only carry a firearm in bear country? Given precision is key, is a firearm preferred by you over bear spray when it comes to preventing or stopping a bear attack? Who is tougher in your mind, Glenn Bond or Jeremy Evans? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Mount Emmerich, about 9 miles west of Haines, Alaska. The Chilkat and Kicking Horse River deliver fresh glacial mountain meltwater to the Chiklat Inlet before eventually flowing into the Gulf of Alaska. At the top of Mount Emmerich lie still unnamed glaciers, and it was first summited in 1976, well after Mount Everest. The climate on the mountain is listed as a tundra climate, with cold, snowy winters and cool, wet summers. It's a granite mountain that lies in the St. Elias mountain range. Mountain goats are known to balance on the cliffs and crags, but not much else can scratch out a living on Mount Emmerich. There are no wolves or cougars here, but lower on its slopes you will find brown bears. 35-year-old Forrest Wagner grew up in Fairbanks and had made a living as a mountain guide on Mount Denali, as well as a high-altitude guide internationally. For the last 10 years, he'd been an assistant professor at the University of Alaska Southeast in the state capital of Juneau. His background allowed him to teach outdoor leadership, ice climbing, backcountry navigation, rock climbing, glacier travel, crevasse rescue, and mountaineering courses. On April 18, 2016, Wagner had planned to take one of his classes out to the Juneau ice field, but poor ice and snow conditions had him choose Mount Emmerich as the location instead. The 6-day expedition consisted of Wagner and 2 teaching assistants, as well as 11 students. The 18th was the 5th day of the expedition, and they were now descending the mountain. They were at about 2,000 feet in elevation and had strung out a bit to skin up their skis. When climbers skin up, they place a slip-resistant cover called a climbing skin over the bottom of their skis. This allows them to use them in much the same way snowshoes are utilized and permits movement across less than ideal skiing terrain. They'd planned to remove the climbing skins once they reached an area more favorable to skiing for their descent from the mountain. While the group placed their climbing skins on their skis, Wagner skied ahead, inspecting prospective descent routes and possible difficulties. Now, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game had issued a public notice at the beginning of the month that bears would likely be out of their winter dens earlier than normal this year. The winter had been more mild than most, and skunk cabbage and other greens had already begun to bloom. These nutritious sprouts are one of the first foods bears seek in this area after emerging, and are Mother Nature's way of inviting them to do so. It is known to local scientists that brown bears in the area hibernate at elevations up to and around 2,000 feet. By himself and leading the expedition, Wagner had not brought a firearm, nor bear spray on the trip. Bears were supposed to be hibernating for a few more weeks, and aren't regularly seen on the barren slopes of Mount Emmerich. Shortly after skiing to an overlook, Wagner gazed out at the terrain and looked for a viable and safe way down the last stretch of the descent. Unbeknownst to Wagner, he had skied right past the small opening of a winter den of a sow grizzly and her 2 cubs. Given the insulation and protection of the den and snow around it, the sow likely hadn't heard or seen Wagner until he was very close to the den opening. She exploded from the opening and bounded toward Wagner, instantly enraged by his proximity to her and her cubs. Wagner lifted his arms above his head and waved them while yelling at her. He was hoping she could see he was a human and not a threat to the 3 bears. He didn't get to wave his arms too much before the sow plowed into him, knocking him to his back. Wagner was trained in a wide variety of survival skills and strategies, but as is all too common in bear attacks, didn't immediately follow the modern conventional wisdom. Instead of playing dead, he fought back, trying to get the bear to stop her attack on him. According to onlookers, the sow's attack was brief, consisting of rapid bites to Wagner's side. As she tossed him around, the battling duo approached a cliff's edge, but were too focused on each other to notice. As they tumbled over the ledge, Wagner somehow landed before the sow. The fall was only 10 feet, and may have done the damage noted to Wagner's leg, but having the enormous sow land on top of him may have added to it. After using Wagner as her landing pad, the sow clambered back up the slope in search of her cubs, while Wagner's expedition members made their way toward him cautiously. While waiting for help, Wagner began administering first aid to himself and utilizing his training as a wilderness first responder. With the bear and her cubs a safe distance away, the students quickly put their learning into practice after arriving. They placed bandages on their professor's wounds and made him as comfortable as possible, while one of them searched the mountain for a spot to place a call for help. An emergency call to the Alaska State Troopers was completed, and they wasted no time in contacting Temsco helicopter service for a lift. A group of heli-skiers were dispatched to find the group and an acceptable landing spot. The heli-skiers arrived and began prepping the professor for evacuation as his students gathered nearby. The students were nervously discussing the event when the bear reappeared near them. An armed state trooper who had arrived stood by them, acting as security from another attack by the sow. Wagner was originally going to be flown to Juneau, only 90 miles to the south. After assessing the seriousness of his injuries, the medics decided to fly him to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage, located 500 miles to the north. By 4 p.m., Wagner had arrived and was being treated by the waiting emergency medical teams. While Wagner was on his way to the hospital, UAS Chancellor Rick Caulfield was contacted. He arranged a second helicopter to evacuate the students and was waiting for them at the ferry terminal upon their arrival. He made sure the school's counseling services were made available to the students after experiencing the traumatic event. Wagner endured 10 surgeries over the following weeks and hours of painful rehabilitation. Skin grafts were placed to cover the damage done to his side, and his leg was also surgically repaired. By the end of May, he had been released to return to his home in Juneau to finish healing. The bear attack wasn't enough to derail his plans for teaching the following fall. Following the attack, Wagner indicated that it was his privilege and obligation to share and participate in adventure settings in the natural world. He stated he harbors no ill feelings toward the bear after all he's been through. As for the sow and her cubs, her behavior was found to be within the expected and normal behavior of a mama bear protecting her cubs. Nothing was ever done to her or her 2 cubs by the authorities. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Even though brown bears were supposed to be hibernating, do you think that the expedition planners should have prepared for one anyway? Should a man with such a breadth of training anticipated running into a bear after reaching the lower elevations? Why do you think the sow returned to the attack site? Would you be up to this much adventure in your life? I think I'll take a pass. I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains near Babb, Montana. Glacier National Park is only 4 miles to the west, and the U.S.-Canada border is 10 miles to the north. The town sits at 4,500 feet in elevation and rests in the shadow of peaks that tower over 9,000 feet high. West of the town, the valleys are packed with sprawling forests of pine, fir, and spruce trees, beautifully interrupted by patches of quaking aspen. Along the creeks and streams, willow and berry bushes screen elk, white-tailed deer, and moose. The predators in this area include black bears, cougars, coyotes, wolves, and grizzly bears. In recent years, it has been noted that grizzly bears are slowly making their way out of the mountains and along the riparian zones of rivers that were their previous habitat. With healthy populations existing in Yellowstone National Park as well as Glacier National Park, the bears are seeking habitat in the western Great Plains, slowly but surely. The black triangles on the map represent locations that grizzly bears have been spotted, but are outliers from their designated habitat boundaries. If nothing else, this map shows that grizzly bears are not predictable and can move into territory without drawing a lot of attention. Around 7 a.m. on Friday, July 12, 2013, 71-year-old Patty Miller was out for a walk with her dogs. Her partners, Angus and Seamus, were of the Havanese dog breed. According to the American Kennel Club, these shaggy Cuban bundles of personality are only about a foot tall at the shoulder and might tip the scales at 13 pounds soaking wet on a tiny scale. They're off the charts when it comes to affection and companionship, but one thing they aren't that good at is fending off grizzly bears. Now, Patty had rented a trailer near the town of Babb for the last 3 years to be closer to her brother, and because she enjoyed it there. Her brother owned a fishing cabin about a quarter-mile away from her trailer on the shores of Duck Lake. Each day she and Seamus and Angus would go for a walk around the lake and enjoy the fresh air and rejuvenating scenery. This Friday was a great day, as the temperatures were in the upper 50s with no wind and fair skies. Just the kind of day that allowed a person to take in all that big sky. Angus was the larger of the 2 dogs, but when the dogs are that little, being bigger doesn't mean much. As Patty prepared for their walk, Angus was being stubborn and didn't want to go. He tried to hide and refused to come toward the door, which was unusual. He always liked to go for walks any time Patty would take them, and she figured he would warm up to the idea once he was outside. She put her cell phone holster on her belt, alongside her emergency whistle and her bear spray. Then she grabbed Angus and headed toward the door. The lake was fringed with trees, but the road was in the open, with good visibility on all sides. This may have been convenient to see anything nearby, like a bear or a moose, but it meant that the sun would beat down with greater intensity, even on cooler days. After a short walk, Patty began to warm up, so she decided to take her jacket off and tied it around her waist and walked on. As the trio continued to walk, Patty noticed that there were none of the natural sounds. No birds chirping or squirrels chittering. The quiet was eerie, but was broken by an ominous twig snap just a few yards away. Now Patty had heard the basics of bear safety from her brother. He had warned her that if she ever ran into a bear, to keep her eyes low and avoid directly looking into their eyes. He had also discussed the best way to dispense bear spray, starting from the ground near you and raising the fog toward the bear to create a large cloud for the bear to run into. If all else fails, he told her, then fold yourself into a ball with your head and chest toward the ground and play dead. If she had a run-in with a bear that went beyond that, then she was on her own, as she didn't carry a firearm. Patty's head quickly swiveled toward the sound of the snapping twig just as two fuzzy little grizzly cubs tumbled out of the bushes onto the road. For a moment she was caught in wonder at how cute they were. Then she was filled with terror as she saw what was close behind them. Not more than 30 feet from Patty and her dogs, a huge grizzly sow was moving through the trees toward her cubs. As soon as the sow's eyes caught sight of Patty, she stood to her hind legs. Patty was terrified at the sight of the bear towering over her by several feet, and all of the cautions of what not to do when you encounter a bear flashed through her mind. They say don't panic, but an 8-foot-tall angry mama bear has a way of inducing that in a person's mind. They say stand your ground, but that would mean nothing short of a fist fight with an animal that outweighs you by several hundred pounds and is armed with huge claws and powerful jaws. They say get aggressive, but I'm sure anyone facing a giant bear has to search pretty hard to find that much courage. They say to avoid getting eaten by covering up vulnerable parts of your body, but that means the bear will have an opportunity to inflict serious damage to your body or kill you. They say play dead, and the bear will likely lose interest in you, but that would expose you to the same risks as the prior step. The sow let out a roar that would rattle the windows of cabins nearby, then dropped to all fours and bounded toward Patty. Thinking she'd met her end, Patty opted for a more primitive reaction than all the scientists and researchers advise. She dashed for the brush and dove in head first. Angus and Seamus weren't taking the coward's way out. They rallied to Patty's defense by jumping a few feet in the air for the chance of biting the bear's muzzle. As she ran, the sow swatted at the dogs, like a dairyman swatting flies. Patty reached her hand down to pull out her bear spray, but was too overwhelmed to retrieve it from its holster properly. The irony of seeing such beautiful scenery behind the angry grizzly charging toward her resonated in her mind for a brief second. Given she couldn't utilize her bear spray, Patty opted to try the curling into a ball strategy that her brother had discussed with her. She put her arms alongside her head and covered her neck with her hands. As she dropped to the ground, the sow swatted her right arm away from her head, tattering the flesh as her claws tore their path. Pain shot through her arm for a moment as she collapsed to the ground. The sow's teeth tore through her scalp in 3 destructive and rapid bites to Patty's head. Though she had managed to curl into a ball, the sow somehow flipped her over and out of the bushes in which she was sheltering. Now on her back and not in a ball anymore, Patty was completely vulnerable to the bear's will. With a single swat, the sow ripped 4 deep gashes that started near Patty's belly button and ran all the way up to her neck. Patty felt a rush of anger wash over her at the thought of her death just before she lost consciousness. A high-pitched and repeated bark was the next thing Patty heard. She opened her eyes to see Seamus staring at her, but he was alone. She instantly knew Angus was dead, or he would be right there beside Seamus. Pain racked her body. Her arm hurt like crazy and her head pounded, but she was alive, for now. While pulling herself to her feet, Patty clicked the latch on Seamus's leash. He lit out like he was fired from a cannon, heading for home. Patty knew she would have to get help quickly and decided to call 911 from her cell phone. It should be easy to get to her, given she was on the road, so she reached down to her cell phone holster on her belt. It was then that she realized that in her rushed departure and trying to gather Angus, she had forgotten to clip her cell phone into the holster. It was sitting on the counter back at her home, and would do her no good right now. Patty knew that her only option was to walk out to find help, or walk until help found her. She stumbled a few yards and was overcome with nausea and dizziness. Her head pounded with the sound of her blood rushing through veins and arteries. She reached down toward her belt once again, and this time retrieved her emergency whistle. Staggering her way down the dirt road, Patty blew her whistle and yelled until she was out of breath. By then the wind had picked up and drowned out her cries. She could feel herself slipping, and knew shock was setting in, so she sat down to collect her senses. At 11:40 a.m., a truck bounced down the road toward Patty. She waved them down and asked them to help her. How she had survived the last 3 hours, she wasn't sure, but she wasn't about to let the first people she'd seen up to this point refuse. The truck was full of kids who had been invited to go fishing with their bus driver. They crowded around Patty and helped her into the truck while they called 911 on the school bus driver's cell phone. A short ways down the road, Patty's sister-in-law hailed the truck and asked if they'd seen a little dog.
She was searching for Angus because Seamus had apparently ran to her house to get help for Patty. As soon as her sister-in-law saw Patty in the back of the truck, she jumped in with her. Placing her shirt over Patty's body and laying on top of her to keep her warm, her sister-in-law reassured Patty. About 6 miles down the road, an ambulance pulled into view as the truck skidded to a stop. The medics loaded Patty onto a gurney and into the back of the ambulance. Within 40 minutes, they pulled into the emergency room entrance at the Blackfeet Community Hospital in Browning. By this time, Patty's eyes had swollen shut from the damage done by the sow bites to her head. The staff cut away her clothes to examine her for additional wounds. They started an IV and administered 4 pints of blood. Realizing Patty's injuries were too serious for the small hospital, they arranged for a medical helicopter to fly her to Kalispell Regional Medical Center in Kalispell. As soon as the helicopter landed in Kalispell, Patty was rushed into the first of 4 operations she would have to endure over the coming few days. This one lasted for 7.5 hours, but she wasn't out of the woods just yet. During that surgery, the doctors would discover that the bear had severed nearly every muscle on the back of Patty's neck and missed her carotid artery by a fraction of an inch. It had ripped off one of her ears, crushed her jaw back into her skull, and fractured her cheekbones. Her nose was also broken, but that paled in comparison to the rest of her frightening injuries. During the surgeries, deep lacerations in her neck, the 3 bite wounds to her head, and deep gashes running up her body were cleaned and sutured shut. For 3 weeks, Patty slowly recuperated in the hospital, under constant observation from the staff of the intensive care unit. Reconstructive surgery was needed to insert 24 pins to put her facial bones back in place, but could do nothing to repair the severed nerve that opened her right eye. It remained permanently closed in a prolonged wink at the Grim Reaper. After many months of grueling rehabilitation, Patty indicated she's just grateful to be alive. Of all the possible outcomes, her injuries were the preferred option. She does miss her little Angus, though. His body was discovered by her neighbor and then laid to rest on Patty's brother's land, but she can't visit his grave. It's just too painful for her. Upon her release from the hospital, Patty returned to her trailer and its beautiful location. She refuses to let that bear rob her of her enjoyment of the outdoors, and was hiking with Seamus soon thereafter, minus one of their beloved partners. As they walk, Seamus glances around, still searching for his brother Angus. For those of you wondering what became of the sow and her cubs, no action was taken against them. Her behavior was classified as within the expected behavior of a sow grizzly protecting her cubs from what she perceived as a threat. Wow, that was a real tearjerker, folks. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Did Seamus and Angus contribute to an aggravating aspect of the bear attack, or would that sow have attacked Patty anyway? Would a firearm have changed the outcome of this attack? Would it have made any difference if Patty hadn't run away from the sow? Frankly, I really doubt it. Finally, do you think Patty may have lived because Angus was watching out for her after he departed? The thought of a little fluffy guardian angel makes me smile. I'll enjoy reading and replying to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.